Okay, so I believe we are now live and
Okay.
recording. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone. I'm Shauna Quill. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Youth Symphony, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our sixth session of the Artist Story Series, which the Youth Symphony is producing in partnership with the New Jersey Youth Symphony and the Wharton Institute for the Performing Arts. This has been a wonderful activity this summer, which has really brought some amazing artists to a really huge audience of people who are learners of all ages, but also many of our New York Youth and New Jersey Youth students. Um, we are very proud today to have Rima Vargas Vetter, one of the New York Youth Symphony trustees, acting as our moderator for this conversation with Weston Sprott. They will speak for approximately 45 minutes, and then we will take questions at the end. And if anyone can see the poll, at least if you could answer where you're joining us from, because at least in the registrations, we had people from all over the country, which was exciting. So I think it's fun to get a sense of who your fellow attendees are. So that's secondary to the conversation, of course, but I just wanted to mention that. I'm now going to stop sharing and hide myself so it can be just the two of you.
Hello. Well, thank you very much, Shauna, for that lovely introduction. And thank you. Let me add my thanks to all of the viewers for joining us tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. As we know, our guest artist is Weston Sprott, and he is Dean. I have to read this because it's quite impressive. Dean of the Preparatory Division at the Juilliard School, and trombonist a trombonist in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. His work includes performance, education, administration, and thought leadership. He is an active speaker, writer, and consultant for diversity and inclusion initiatives in classical music, regularly presenting at conferences and contributing to musical publications. So it is really a pleasure and an honor to welcome you tonight, Weston. Thank you for coming.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Um, each artist, each story is very singular and unique. And we have found that our lives are enriched by listening to and following the various paths each artist has taken to become a professional in their chosen field. So it would be really great, Weston, if we could start at the beginning. Why and when music came into your life, how it came into your life, and when did the trombone become part of your life?
Well, the trombone became a part of my life when I was a sixth grader in junior high school band. But I think perhaps when music came into my life was much, much earlier than that. We always had music in our home. We listened to not a lot of classical music, but we listened to a lot of R&B, a lot of Motown. I grew up in the Pentecostal church. We heard a lot of gospel music. So there was always very much a singing, vocal, expressive quality of music that was in my ear and that attracted me to music. As a kid, when we were in elementary school, we played the recorder like a lot of kids do. So that was well before the trombone. So technically, the recorder was my musical beginning, albeit a very humble one. And growing up in Texas, we went to a lot of football games because Texas high school football is a very serious thing. And we always thought it was really fun to sit next to the bands in the stands and watch the halftime shows. I was always enamored by the band. I thought it was a really cool thing. My dad played trombone when he was in junior high and early in high school, and so he thought it was a cool thing. And he would tell me all the time, "Oh, I used to play the trombone, back in the day." And I think he quit after ninth grade, but he still remembered it very fondly. And so, sitting in the stands, the trombone is a very visual instrument. You can see the slide moving, and as a kid, that's a very appealing thing. And so, when the opportunity came up to decide what my extracurricular activity would be if in junior high school, do you want to be in the band or the orchestra or the chorus or something else? I said, yeah, I want to be in the band, and I wanted to play the trombone. And my dad taught me the first couple of notes. At the time, I remember he told me he would teach me how to play the scale because I think maybe he one, and that was the B flat scale because the trombone's in B flat, so it's an easy one to remember. And so right from the get-go, I felt like I had a little bit of a heads up on the other students. And when you're 10 or 11 years old, even feeling like you know one thing that some of the other students don't know, puts you at least psychologically at a very large advantage. So you felt like, I've got like this little bit of a competitive edge on my peers, and I sound good, and I know a couple of things that I can do, and it inspired me to practice quite a bit right from the beginning. So that's where it started in Spring, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. I practiced all the time, obsessively. I didn't take private lessons because I wasn't really aware that I should. It wasn't really a thing, but we had a really good junior high and a very good high school band program because the Texas Music Educators Association in Texas is just a very serious thing in Texas. They take it very seriously, very competitively. There's always competitions in all region and lots of chair tests and things like that. So I gained an affinity for it just because I fell in love with the sound. I always wanted to practice. I don't think my parents ever told me once to practice or that I needed to. It was just something that I really enjoyed doing. I fell in love with the sound.
That's very interesting because what I'm getting, or what we're getting, is you're very self-motivated. And that's unusual sometimes in a young person because usually, mom or dad is saying, you were going to play the piano, go practice. You said you wanted to play this, go do it. And you didn't. And did that, in a way, do you feel like that helped you move more quickly into your musicianship? Because it was just something you loved doing that you just keep practicing?
I think so. I mean, I've never viewed practice as work.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I suppose it is, and maybe I wouldn't tell too many people who pay me to play the trombone that it's not, but maybe I just, I mean, but maybe I just let it out because we're in a public interview. But I find a lot of joy in practicing. There's something really, really nice about the isolation and feeling that you're alone with this problem or with this kind of this puzzle you're trying to figure out, whether it's a technical puzzle or a musical puzzle or whatever. I've always found it to be fascinating. It's just fun for me because the amount of growth that's possible is infinite. So no matter how good you get at it, you never reach the end. There's always the next thing that you can layer on. And so I find it fun. I mean, the biggest problem I've had in my playing career actually is overplaying. As brass players, very similar to singers and athletes, we can be susceptible to overuse injuries. And if I find myself at a time when I'm not very busy, which is never the case anymore, but at one point in time it was, I could practice for hours and hours and hours on end, and I would just never emotionally get tired of it. My face would break down after a while because the trombone is not intended to be played 7 or 8 hours a day every day. But mentally, I was right there. I could never
Yeah,
get enough of it.
that's interesting. That's very interesting. So, in actual fact, now, just before we leave, you're in junior high, you're doing the band, and you're really moving forward because you're enjoying it. But were there any teachers or mentors along there who went, wow, I could help him or help push you in a direction? Or did you really just really self motivate through the
Well,
whole thing?
it was a combination. All of my band directors in the schools that I went to were really, really good, really good. So even though I wasn't taking private lessons, I was getting great instruction in the band hall for one. These guys, Randy Vaughn and Pat Patterson and Dave Gressens. I remember Bob Lammert or Dave Lammert was, if I remember correctly, was my first band director. And also, we had really strong programs. So I was also motivated by my peers because they took it very seriously. They were always practicing all the time. We all wanted to be first chair and we wanted to win the marching band competitions. And so, a good friend of mine in high school is Tim Higgins. And Tim Higgins is now the principal trombonist of the San Francisco Symphony. So, we went to the same public high school and sat in physics class together and also sat first and second chair in the band. And we would get to the band hall early in the morning before school started, and we would play duets and Arbenz exercises, and we would get big books of all the standard concertos and solos, and I would play a phrase, and then he would play a phrase, and I would play the next one, or however we decided to do it that day. And then when school's over, we'd do it again. And on the weekends, I'd go over to his house and we'd play duets and stuff like that. So I had a lot of positive, encouraging musical influences around me in that way. And my junior year of high school, I was the first time I made the All-State band in Texas.
Wow.
And I remember we had our guest conductor for the All-State band was this guy Gary Green, who was the band director at University of Miami at the time. And he conducted this piece called Tempered Steel, which is a really fun piece for wind ensemble. And I just remember having so much fun at this thing. I was just having a blast. And he was a really inspiring conductor. And that was the first time I thought to myself, I would just like to do this all the time. Is there a way to just do this and make a living? And for playing, being around other people who are really good at their instrument and also motivated to practice, and this would be great. And later that year, because the All-State Festival happens in February, in April or May, the Houston Symphony was having their season closing concert. And it was Christoph Eschenbach's final concert, if I remember correctly, as music director. And I had never been to the Houston Symphony before. I'd never heard a professional orchestra at that point in time. I was about 16 years old. And I asked my dad if he would take me to the concert because I heard they were doing a piece that had a big trombone solo. And I didn't know anything about the orchestral repertoire really at that time, but it turned out the first professional orchestra concert I ever heard was Mahler's Third Symphony, which for people who are listening and who know this music, know that's the biggest trombone solo in the repertoire. And now it's my favorite excerpt to play. It's my favorite excerpt to teach. And so I went to this concert and thought, wow, this is really cool. It opens with this amazing French horn line and the trombone gets to play big solos. And then when it's over, thousands of people clap for the trombone player. And at that point, that's when I was convinced. It was like, you know what? This is the thing. I think that was the day that mentally I turned the corner and said, I'm going to be a music major and I'm gonna major in trombone performance. I'm going to go for this thing. I was kind of blast shields down, march straight ahead from that point forward.
So you're still in high school, and now did you share with your parents that you were thinking of just majoring in music, or was that too soon? Did they?
So that concert I was telling you about was near the end of my junior year of high school. And so, that next year is when you have to make your decisions about where you want to go to college and where you want to audition, all these things. So I told my parents that I wanted to major in music. And they thought if you want to do that, you probably should have a backup plan because their perception of what being a music major was that it's a very difficult industry. The success rate is low, and that people oftentimes don't make very much money, and you want to have an alternative to that. And I think another part of that they were aware of, even if not for all of even not because they had researched whatever, just stereotypically what they understood is being a classical musician at the time did not seem like a thing that Black people do. There was not a sense of education in the Black community about what it means to be a classical musician. No one in our family had ever tried to do this before. When you go to a place like the Houston Symphony, at least that time, 20 years ago, there's no sense of cultural affirmation. You can go to the concert hall and you feel like perhaps my dad and I were the only two Black people in the audience and there were no Black people on stage. And so I think there was this disconnect for them. Like, our son wants to do something that we don't really see other people who look like him doing this. And I think their reason for saying you want to have a backup plan was just because they wanted to be protective parents. Parents want to see their kids be happy and successful. And I think there was some parental fear associated with me doing that. So when I decided I wanted to go to college to major in music, they suggested I have a backup plan, and that's actually how I ended up choosing the music schools that I decided to apply to. We got a U.S. News and World Report magazine. I think one day we were standing in line at the grocery store, and they have at the time, they had these different lists of the top music schools, the top business schools, the top this, the top that, whatever. And we noticed that the University of Michigan and Indiana University were the two schools that both had a top 10 music school and a top 10 business school. And so we decided, those ended up being the two schools that I actually went and took live auditions for. And then I ended up going to Indiana University for my first couple of years before transferring to the Curtis Institute of Music.
Why did you like Indiana? Was it did you like it, had a better experience there, or did it feel
Yeah,
strong?
I mean, when it comes to the actual audition process at Indiana versus Michigan, it could have just it could have just been the day in a
Uh,
way. I remember when I auditioned at the University of Michigan, it was it was on a traditional audition day. So there were hundreds of kids all over the school, and it didn't seem like the process at that time or on that particular day was personalized. There were a lot of students there. And Indiana had actually taken my audition on a day that wasn't a traditional audition day. So the teachers were able to hear me a little bit longer. I remember Carl Lenthy, who ended up becoming my teacher, actually walked me down to the admissions office after my audition, and then he invited me to a master class that was happening later that day. And I was able to hang out with some of the students because there wasn't all of this other, there weren't all these other activities happening at the same time. So for whatever reason, that first day I came into IU as a senior in high school, maybe it was March or something like that. And I
yeah.
immediately felt like I had a sense of community, like, oh, I'm really well liked here, and the teacher likes me, and he personally walked me down to the admissions office and talked to my parents. I got to go to a class and converse with a bunch of the other students and things like that. And so that just happened to be that influenced the decision that I made. I can't say it was the world's most informed decision, but it turned out to be a great one.
Well, on another level, it is because it is very important. I mean, many of the things I'm certainly not telling you this, but you probably know it a lot better than I. But making people welcome. We're not just a musician or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever we are in life. We're also human beings, and taking that extra time with a young person who's starting out is a very important thing. And of course, you're going to feel better about yourself when somebody else is making an effort. And sometimes those big things, it's like being, in a market. It's just it's overwhelming. So, in actual fact, it's a very enlightened way to feel to go with something where you feel welcome is a very important thing. You're clearly somebody who respects other people, but is going to be respectful. You know.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we have this conversation now, or that happens quite regularly about equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? And in the last few years, people have now added on to that the B. So it's equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And
Yeah.
and I just remember after having that experience, even just for that one day, I immediately had this feeling like, oh, I belong here. People like me, and they've welcomed me into their community. They've only known me for all of 10 minutes, and I already feel like I have a space here, and that was very influential.
That's very important. I think it's wonderful, and it's also a good thing to know inside yourself. You know. So now that you're at the university and you're starting really a serious part of your musical training, what happens next? What do you do?
Well, what's what's interesting is the first day of school at Indiana, they have these placement auditions for ensembles, as I'm sure a lot of schools do. You play your audition, they determine what chair you get in the orchestra, the wind ensemble. And Indiana, as a lot of people know, especially students who are thinking about music school, is a really large music school. I think there are probably 50 trombone players, or maybe more, when I was there. And that's why they have three full-time teachers who are all carrying studios of like 15 to 20 students. It's a busy school. They have five orchestras and four wind ensembles and all this stuff. And I remember having practiced like a demon all summer to learn these four excerpts that we were going to have to play for this audition. And I started taking private lessons the summer before college started. So I finally got a teacher on a regular basis, and we pounded these excerpts and solos and etudes and things like that. And I really knew nothing. I mean, he was preaching humility to me. He said, when you get there, you're going to be a freshman, you're going to be 17 years old, there's going to be a bunch of other students who are doctoral students and master students, and you're going to learn your place, and they're going to be better than you, and you should just hang out near where the masters and doctoral students are and stand by their practice room and see what they're doing so you can kind of get educated about what's going on. And I remember standing outside of the audition room talking to some of the other students about, you're learning things. It's the first day. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? And I remember really distinctly one kid saying, "Oh, I went to Interlochen," and the other kids kind of going, "Wow, like that's really cool." And I remember thinking, I don't know what Interlochen is, and just being really embarrassed about that, because other students were talking about experiences that they had had in places they had been that I couldn't relate to. If students said, "Well, I auditioned for Curtis," it's like, "What's Curtis?" I didn't know what Curtis was when I was a freshman or my first day of school. And so we had the audition, and the teachers come out after the audition and they say, "Okay, we just heard 50 trombone players play. Everyone did a great job. The first chair in the top orchestra is Weston Sprott." And I went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." So it's like that blew me away, because I remember at that time I was thinking, if I got any chair in any orchestra, like if I scored in the top 20 people out of 50, I would feel pretty good and I could kind of work my way up from there. But to come out in first, and then that actually turned out to repeat itself multiple times over the course of several semesters. I It started to resonate with me. Maybe I could do this thing. And so I remember going to my lesson the next day. My first lesson of the year was that Tuesday, and my teacher was looking at my registration, and he said, "Oh, I see that you're registered for this class and that class, and also for introduction to business and computers in business. Tell me about the business thing." And I said, "Well, my parents really want me to do business because they think I need a backup plan because I'll probably never make it or something." I couldn't really articulate it because I was 17. I didn't know any better. And he said, "Well, I've met a lot of students before, and I think that if you do what you're supposed to do and you follow instructions, I think you'll have a future in music." And because I didn't really want to do the business thing anyway, I took him at his word, and I walked down to the registrar's office and I dropped the business classes. And then I remember telling my parents about it, I think at Christmas, after
Ooh,
they had made the deposit for the next semester's tuition.
how did that go?
And they weren't happy about it, but they also they weren't angry about it. I think they said, "Okay, you've created a line for yourself. You're in this thing. You've got 4 years." So they said it turned out to be 5, because I went to Curtis afterwards, and Curtis is a lot cheaper, because they're tuition free. But they were like, "Look, you're an adult." At that time, I was now 18. "You're an adult. You make your own decisions. You do what you want to do. We're going to help you for 4 years of college. And when that's over, if you can't figure it out, and then that's going to be your problem." So I said, "Fine, I'll take it." And I just felt for me that the clock started ticking at that point. I felt like, okay, now I've got a real pressure to succeed in a timely fashion. And
Mhm.
I used it as a motivating factor, and it thankfully worked out.
Yes, I'm sure it wasn't simple, but it's a very an interesting thing that a parent wants desperately to protect the child. But it's also a huge gift from the parent when they say, "Okay, we trust you. You've got to do it. You made your decision." In a way, that was really a great gift from them. That they just, yes, now you're on your own, but that's really pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you're on your own, but there's this
Yeah.
threat of a lack of support later on. But like you said, that's a gift, because it teaches you the concept of responsibility and self-sustainability at an earlier age. And it
Mm-hmm.
makes you think, I'm responsible for my own success. I don't always have someone who's going to eternally pay my bills or make sure that it's everything is taken care of. If you want to make adult decisions, you have to follow that with adult effort.
Yeah.
Um, there was an interview with Winton on CNN a few months ago after his father passed away. He was being interviewed by Anderson Cooper. Not sure if you saw it, but he was relaying these stories about his father. Anderson was asking about his father, and he said he remembered getting ready to pack his bags and go to New York to go to Juilliard, and his dad told him, "Don't have anything to fall back on. Have nothing to fall back on."
Oh,
And Anderson relayed, he said, he said, that's really unique advice, because most parents are always trying to find a million different things for their kids to fall back on, just to always have this safe net and make sure. And he's like, I guess what his father was saying is, if you're going to do it, go do it, you know?
well,
Go straight
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. It's as I said, I kind of find that a gift. I think that's not that parents shouldn't be protected, but that it does. take responsibility for the decisions you make, and some work, some don't work, but they were your decisions. So
Right.
this is exciting. Now we got you to Curtis, and is there anything in between when you making that transition to Curtis? It was smooth. You wanted to go there.
Yeah, the Curtis thing was a bit of divine intervention, honestly. We had an Indiana University chapter of the International Trombone Association, which basically meant we each paid a small due of, I don't know, $25 a year or something, each trombone student. And we would have a couple of activities, maybe a pizza party or something. And then there was one time during my sophomore year at Indiana where we organized a field trip and we all went to Chicago and we heard the Philadelphia Orchestra playing on tour in Chicago. And I remember they did the main piece they played was Enigma Variations with Wolfgang Sawallisch was conducting. And I grew up in Houston. I'd gone to a couple of concerts, but I had never heard something the level of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I'd never sat in a place like Chicago Symphony Hall with that type of history. And I was like a kid in the candy store. I was like sitting on the edge of my seat the whole time, and I was observing with great focus all of the most minute details. Like, oh, I noticed that like Nitsan Haros, who ended up becoming my teacher, that when he picked up his mute, he'd pick it up with his left hand and put it in the bell when I used to pick it up with my right hand and put it in. I recognized that he emptied his spit valve on this side as opposed to when I used to do it on that side because I was just so tuned in to all of these little things that were happening. You know,
Yeah.
I was such a geek about it. And by that point in time, I had heard of Curtis, and actually, the whole trombone section with minus one person at Curtis was from Texas. So people I'd gone to Allstate with had gone on to Curtis, and they were telling me about how great of a school it was, and this and that, or whatever. And then I heard the Philadelphia Orchestra, and they told me how great their teacher was, and it was pretty. I was like, okay, this guy's amazing. He's a great player. Everyone says he's a great teacher, and I really didn't think that much of it, honestly. It was that concert was probably in November or something. So the divine intervention part is that I go home. My parents were living in Dallas at the time. They had moved to Dallas after I graduated high school. And I'm just at home for Christmas. And then one day I woke up and it just kind of hit me. I went, oh my God, I should be going to Curtis. I should be in Philadelphia and go to Curtis. And at the time, Curtis had this age limit where you had to be under 21 to audition. That's not the case anymore, but it was then. And I thought, oh man, like if I don't go right now, I never get to go. So I should try. I swear to you, it just hit me like out of thin air like
Oh,
this. And so I remember I called Curtis that day and they were closed because they're like, we're closed until after New Year's with offices reopen on January 5th or whatever happens to be. And so I called on January 5th and they said, sorry, the application deadline was December 1st. And it's January 5th. You can't audition. And I begged and pleaded some more until they finally agreed to say, fine, fine, we'll let you audition, whatever, if you're just going to bug us about it. So
yeah.
and so I didn't tell my parents about it because they didn't really know about the music school in Indiana that much. They sure didn't know about what Curtis was. I mean, half the people in Philadelphia didn't know what Curtis was at that time either because it's such a small school. So I emptied out whatever little money I had in my bank account from doing work study and a couple of gigs, and I used all that money to fly to Philadelphia and stay in a little airport hotel and eat Philly cheesesteaks for $5. So I was trying to eat the cheapest thing I could because I had no money. And I auditioned for Curtis and I got in and I moved to Philadelphia that summer and went there for 3 years and had a great experience there, which we were welcome to talk about if you want. And on my last day of school, which was very fortunate, on a Friday, May 5th, I won the Met audition on the absolute last day of school. So it was like right on time, very fortunate transition from school to the Metropolitan Opera.
So you're graduating from school and you do the audition and you get into the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra at the same time.
Yeah, so I'd done a handful of other auditions. During those 3 years while I was at school, I'd won a couple of regional auditions for the Delaware Symphony and the Pennsylvania Ballet, which is the ballet company of Philadelphia, and I won a sublist audition for the Philadelphia Orchestra, so I was starting to do some substitute work there. But as far as a real full-time job, yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday, and I printed off my last art history project or last art history paper from a room, like I think it was 235J or something like that. I think that was the number of the room. And I remember God bless her soul, I mean, I love the teacher. And if I took the class now, I'd probably be more interested in it because I'm more mature now than I was back then when I was 22. But I remember I hated art history and I didn't want to do it anymore, and I didn't want to write any more papers. And I just wanted to play trombone, you know? It's like when you're in school, sometimes you can have a very tunnel vision thing about yourself. You're just like, I'm here to do this thing and
Yeah.
nothing else. I've broadened my horizons since then, but at the time, that's what I thought. So I remember on Tuesday printing out that last paper and thinking, I don't ever want to do this ever again. Let's just go to New York and see if we can get this thing done. And we had the 3 rounds on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And on Friday night, I came back and I had the job. So that's that.
So there you were.
Yeah.
What was the audition process like?
The Met audition process is and was a completely blind process. So every single round was behind the screen. You just had a different number assigned to you during each round, and they chose the winner, which for that particular audition, thankfully, was me as a number. So there was never a moment where the screen came down or you had to do section playing or something like that. It was just you had to play the 30 different excerpts that they had selected and a movement of a solo. And I remember the solo for me at that time was the beret from Bach Suite 3. Um, that one. So, yeah, so that's what that audition process was like. And, other orchestras all over the country and all over the world have a wide variety of different types of audition processes. A small number of them are screened from start to finish. Some of them screen the first couple of rounds, don't screen the finals. Some of them have section rounds. Some of them don't do screens at all. Some of them invite everybody. Some of them only invite a small handful of people. And I've been to every version of audition, and though the one consistency in my experience is that all of the auditions that I've won have been ones where the screen was present from start to finish. So when I won the Philadelphia Orchestra Sublist Edition, Delaware Symphony, Pennsylvania Ballet, Metropolitan Opera, those were all auditions where the screen was present from start to finish, and I was hired before my identity was known. And I've never had such an experience when that wasn't the case.
It's a very interesting thing for everyone to contemplate because it is, an audition process that's, I don't know if everyone is actually clear what the screen means, but it's clear that you could not be seen. And it's good for the people listening to us tonight to know that that is a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
It seems somehow in my mind somewhat fairer, but that's just my opinion.
I mean, there's a raging debate about this in the world right now, between articles and conversations that people are having. There's been some things in the New York Times about it. I think there's going to be another one in another article in the New York Times that relates to this issue. Having a screen from start to finish, I think, is a very, very fair way to assess someone's sheer musical performance abilities.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not suggesting that it's the perfect way to do it, but I think it's the best of the options that are made available to us. I think anything that helps to eliminate the implicit biases that people are prone to is beneficial when it comes to fairness. I think the bigger question is, as it relates to orchestras, is playing and how you play, should that be the only thing that is valued?
Yeah.
Which is a different question,
Yeah.
How you play is one thing. Who plays is another thing. What else you do besides playing within an organization and within a community also matters as well. So it's just a matter of figuring out what's the appropriate balance of all those different things depending on the community that you're in or the community that you're trying to serve. And figuring out then how do you judge for those things in a way that's fair. But as it relates to the part that we oftentimes refer to as musical athleticism, and that doesn't necessarily just mean that you can play very high and fast and loud, but also that you can, the musical athleticism, you can also play with wonderful phrasing and a great sense of vibrato and the appropriate style for Bach or Beethoven or Schumann or Ellington or whatever, Stravinsky, whatever it happens to be, Florence Price. Understanding all those different things, it's your ability to interact appropriately and with with the appropriate technique from a musical perspective. How we judge that, I think you can judge that. The best way to judge that is from a blind perspective.
Um, just somewhat relating to that, in the orchestra, when you dial back, when you first seen an orchestra, perhaps you and your dad were the only two people, black people in the audience, and there was nobody black in the orchestra. When you get into an orchestra, in the classical world, it still seems to be um, how many other people actually look like you when you're there. And that's also interesting after an audition behind a screen. Then you come out into another world.
Yeah, the numbers are still very small. There's still the current situation is still a long way from where it needs to be, and there's a lot of work that needs to get done. Um, I try my best to be optimistic about it. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think this conversation is more present now than perhaps it's ever been. People are talking about it. People are sharing their stories, positive stories, negative stories, harrowing stories, but just actually making an account of what is and how things are. And I think that's a significant step in the direction of progress.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there, there are beginning to be more people in leadership positions. There are more initiatives that are supporting getting more representation in orchestras. The results are not there yet, for sure, which means there's still a lot of work left to be done. But it is heartening to know that these conversations are happening. And one thing that stood out to me, I remember last year when I started at Juilliard, there was this group from Sphinx Lead, which is a group of young people who are working to become administrators in the arts. And one of their touch points was at Juilliard, and they were having a roundtable discussion with the fellows, or what, I can't remember exactly what they called them, but they're called the leaders, Sphinx leaders in this program, and they were talking with administrators of color from Juilliard about their different experiences and asking questions and things like that. And I remember Aaron Flagg, who leads our jazz department at Juilliard, saying, I feel like this is progress because when I was in school, the idea that there would be a roundtable of administrators of color from Juilliard with a cohort of young leaders who were, getting ready to transition into meaningful roles in the industry, that would have never happened. So the fact that we're here, these conversations at that level, I don't think were happening
Mm-hmm.
20, 30, 40 years ago. And so I do think there's a lot of progress in a lot of areas. We're in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement in conjunction with COVID-19. And I think that conflation of things, even though it's very troubling, I think there's some silver linings in there because people are coming face to face with some serious realities about our world and being confronted with the idea that they need to be addressed, and some voices that weren't getting heard before are starting to get a little bit more airtime,
Yes.
which is really, really valuable. So we'll see where it goes.
It is just going slightly back when you say um, the thing that can be judged is the musicality, the musical talent behind the screen, and then the individual, what they're going to bring, how they're going to fit in, how they're going to do something. Not everybody can be the one lone person or the two people who are different, whether it's a question of race or it's a question of gender. Um, it's not an easy thing. So within all of this, it's interesting, and I think this is probably interesting to people listening, that in many ways, I have a feeling that your music sustains you. And also that initial thing of your parents saying, well, if you're going to go out there, then you're going to have to make some decisions and you're going to live by them. And you seem to have incorporated that so that the music is still bringing you joy, but you're also stepping up for the things that need to be addressed. And that's, first reading just part of your bio and thinking administration and this, it's important to take responsibility for your life because it's not going to get easier and certainly not going to get easier in the short term. These are all steps forward, but there's not going to be some wonderful epiphany if everything's perfect tomorrow. That's not going to happen. So,
Yeah, I mean that's definitely not going to happen. And I've chosen to have a pretty multifaceted career, as
mm-hmm.
both a performer and an educator and administrator and all these other things. And I enjoy doing all of those things. You know, I enjoy them all individually, and I enjoy them even more because of the variety of going back and forth, and because they're all meaningful to me. Um, I don't think that what I'm doing is something that everybody should do or should try to do or want to do. You know, I think people are motivated and do their best when they're doing something that truly captivates their interest. You know, I happen to be someone who my interest is captivated by a lot of things. And I also think there's there's a lot of pressure in the Black community, oftentimes, especially in spaces where Black people have not been welcome, to
Hmm.
feel like, you know, oftentimes you get to a place and you're the first one who's done this, or you're the only one who's currently doing that, and that's a difficult place to be in. And
Sure.
you know, in some ways, you know, people talk about this when you're the first to do something, or the only person who's doing something. In a way, that's special. In another way, it's very sad. It's very sad because, you know, Black people in this country and Black people across the world have been doing amazing, awe-inspiring things for since since they arrived here. You know, and the fact that some of those efforts and accomplishments are only beginning to be recognized now is really a shame. You know, so it's like a dubious honor in a way.
Yeah.
And my friend Titus Underwood, who is now the first principal oboist, African American oboist of a major orchestra, plays in Nashville Symphony. One of the things he says all the time is, I really want to see more boring Black stories. You know, that would be really great. Like, why is it that so many of the Black stories are of someone who has done all of these exceptional things and managed to overcome that and this other thing, and you know, they practiced 25 hours a day and whatever, you know, and didn't get private lessons, all these other things. We need to have more stories where people can just live a normal, happy life and be successful. They can just, you know, they pick up an instrument at an early age and they get high quality private lessons and they enjoy it and their parents encourage them and they have the correct information to choose the right school, and they choose the right school not by luck but because the system is set up for them to
Yeah.
choose the right place and have a good match. And then if they work as industriously as other people do, then their opportunity to be successful is based on something that's very normalized, not based on something that's rooted in exceptionalism. So I think, you know, with some of the work that I'm doing now in an administrative role at Juilliard Music Advancement Program and Juilliard Pre-College, is trying to work towards achieving some of that, which is part of this equity piece. You know,
Hmm.
if we put all of these different things, which some of them are very difficult to do, if you were able to quantify them on a spreadsheet, for example, if you were able to quantify effort on a spreadsheet, I mean, imagine if that were a possibility. And you could say, when we filter for effort, everyone who puts in this much effort gets the same result. That's when we would know we've achieved some degree of equity, you know, and obviously we all know the world is not there yet, but that's the world that we're trying to work towards.
Well, it's certainly worth working towards. Um, in your life in the orchestra, and this is kind of part of that as well, you also have a solo career and you guest around the world and you do chamber music. In your musical experience, orchestral musician is different than when you go someplace else or you're doing solo work where you choose what you're going to play, and that how do you, is that equal to you too? Do you really enjoy doing other things, or?
I love playing solos and I love playing chamber music, you know,
Yeah.
because, and I think if I only played solos, I probably wouldn't like it as much. You know, I think the balance is what makes it. I find that a lot of orchestral musicians, the ones who they only play in the orchestra and they never do solo work and they almost never do chamber music, tend to be the least happy people. The people who do a wider variety of things seem to be happier, whether that's chamber or solo or teaching or whatever it happens to be. Because I think there's value in the variety. I think it keeps you interested. And I also think that everybody needs to have at least some portion of their life where they feel like they have control. And you also need to have some portion of your life where you feel like you don't have to make all the decisions. It's nice. So when we go to the orchestra and we play, it's like, okay, I don't have to choose the music. I don't have to determine, the staging and stuff like that. I just show up and do a good job playing my part, and it's going to be a wonderful thing. And then there's also this avenue of playing solos where you say, you know what, now I get to choose the music, and I get to choose the tempo and the vibrato, and I get to choose the order of the pieces. I get to choose the pianist that I want to collaborate with, all these different things. This is kind of my own personal artistic baby. And then chamber music provides a different avenue. It's much more of a democratic process in that way when you're playing chamber music. You're getting a chance to interact with people in a much more even-handed way. And having a balance between those things is very healthy. Having said that, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. Being a soloist, not say that I'm not carrying a huge solo career or something, but when I had more time for it in a busy season, I might play 15 recitals in a year on top of playing 15 recitals and a couple of concertos on top of playing all these shows at the Opera House. And that's physically a daunting thing to do. Oftentimes, it's an intense balancing act from a physical perspective. And I learned every once in a while. I learned a couple of hard lessons. I found my limits. I remember once. Yeah, I remember once playing Parsifal, I believe it was, on a Saturday, which is a 6-hour Wagner opera for those who don't know, and you're pretty tired when that's over. And then flying to Georgia at like 6 a.m. the next morning, running through a recital program, and then trying to play the recital that evening. And needless to say, it wasn't my best. I mean, that's the nature of the business. You're going to play a couple hundred concerts a year. Every once in a while, it's not going to be your day. And that day, it wasn't my day. It didn't go so great, but it also taught me something. It's like, just because you put something on a sheet of paper and it seems like a good idea and you want to do it doesn't mean that you're physically capable of doing this. And so what I've gathered from trying to do all these different things is really learning a lot about myself. Over the course of these last 15 years of being a professional, I have a pretty clear idea now when I write things down or when someone asks me if I want to do something, whether or not I currently have the capacity to handle that. It's been very important, knowing when to say yes and when to say no.
Well, within that is also when you said, coming out of college or music school, you're one is one person. But now with maturity, you've mentioned this a few times, balance. There is balance, and we need to find, as well as the responsibility, that balance in your life, because we certainly know many stories where people get used up and spat out. You don't want to do that to yourself. So
Yeah, my wife would say that I have no balance. Uh,
we'll interview her another time.
but I my schedule is full all the time, but it's full of things that I like doing. So it's great. I mean, I don't do well when I'm doing nothing.
Uh-huh.
You know, I like to work, because I like my work. Like right now we're in a position where we have not been actively performing concerts for months and months. I think my last concert was March 10th or something with the Met, but I still love practicing. That's why my trombone's behind me. I actually didn't put it there as a prop. I just noticed that it's there. But because in between returning emails and doing meetings and stuff like that today as an administrator, as we're trying to figure out what the upcoming school year is going to look like, I've been practicing because it's again about that balance. It kind of soothes my soul to play a handful of scales and a couple of etudes and a solo and things like that. It's fun.
I was going to ask you, because it is hard, especially for our young listeners, people who've been in school, they aren't going back to school, and how do you organize and maximize your time at this particular moment in time, because we don't really know when it's going to end. So there are lots of meetings and things, but your music is something that you'll always have with you. It's interesting. Music for me fills space. It fills my soul, but it also fills space. I'm not in any way a musician, but listening and being somebody who I live music is wonderful. It fills something, and at this time, I don't know if there's anything you can say that would help a younger music student or musician, but how do you how do you organize and maximize your time to be healthy in this time and to keep going and to keep improving?
There's a lot of negative things about this time, but from a musical perspective, there's there's silver lining there, right? I mean, if you don't have a performance coming up in the next few weeks, or maybe perhaps not even the next few months, that provides you some runway to achieve some things that maybe otherwise you never felt that you could achieve.
Mm-hmm.
I think the shortcoming would be if you actually don't make a plan and you don't write down the things that you want to do and then script a plan for what those can be. So I'm sure that every student who's listening to this can think of some technical deficiency they have that they want to improve, and they recognize that that thing they want to improve is not a short-term fix. That's something that they know it's going to take 6 months or a year to really get nailed down in the way that they want to. And in normal times, there's always this balance of I can't go back and start from scratch because I have to play a concert in a couple of weeks. So I don't want to go back and start from scratch because I got to be at my lesson next week, and I don't want to take one step backwards in order to take two steps forward. But this is a time when you can actually do that, and you can say, that thing that I know I need to go back and practice incredibly slow and take my time and reorganize this sense of technique. Now is one of those rare moments in time where you can actually commit to that in a real way. So I would tell students, list out some goals and make them more of those medium term goals, the things that you know will take you 3 months, 6 months to achieve. There are probably some things that your teachers told you that you know you should be doing, but you haven't done. And now is the time to go ahead and pick up the pieces on those. There's some books that your teachers have probably told you that you should read that would make you better or understand your musicianship more, and you've been putting that to the side because you don't have time.
Yeah.
Well, now you may have some time, so take advantage of that, because at some point in time, hopefully sooner than later, this moment in time, we'll be able to turn the page on it. We don't know exactly when it's going to be. I hope it's soon. And then that runway will not be as long anymore. You don't want to look back and say there was a period of time where I was hanging out at home for 6 months or 8 months or whatever, and I wasted that time. I really could have I really could have practiced all of my scales very, very slow and very thoughtfully and made sure that my technique was completely organized and that was going to serve me well to play these other solos. But instead, I got caught up playing video games or whatever it happens to be, So, I find that idle time can be a negative if you don't plan it. So, I oftentimes you're most productive when you actually have a schedule. So even if you're just at home, create a schedule, write it down. Write down when your practice time is going to be, exactly what you want to achieve. Be very specific about it, because sometimes you can fall in that trap and go, well, I've got the whole day, so I'll eventually get to it. And then before you know it, the sun's going back down and you didn't get to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have a particular time when you practice? Do you practice in the morning or?
Right now, because I've got so many other duties, it's kind of all over the place. But I can tell you, for the students that I've had over the years, and every instrument's different. Every instrument, some instruments you can practice more, some you can practice less. But I always encourage my students to practice 4 hours a day. That, as a trombone teacher, for kids who are music majors at the college level, I would tell them practice your instrument 4 hours a day, and any time that you practice before noon counts as time and a half. So basically, if you can knock out 2.5 hours or so, whatever it is, 2 hours and 40 minutes before 12 o'clock, you can be done, go read a book, watch some TV, enjoy your day. And that's because I've always felt like morning practice is more productive than afternoon or evening practice. I In an ideal world, I would get up, I'd brush my teeth and put on my clothes, eat breakfast, drink some coffee, brush my teeth again as a trombone player, and then practice. Because when the moment is there, when your mind is still relatively clear, and also when you have the most energy, which is oftentimes at near the beginning of the day, is when your best work is going to get done. When you wait till the end of the day, when you've now been bombarded with a lot of other stimuli, you've had to check a million emails, or your mom yelled at you, or whatever happened, you know what I mean? And now you're tired. Your ability to focus in a really intense way on what you're trying to achieve musically is diminished. So that's why I try to get it in as early as I possibly can.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there are any questions, Shauna, because I don't want to override if we.
Hi. Well,
Do we have?
um, people who are still watching, we have quite a healthy group with us. So if you want to type in your questions now into the chat box, we can go ahead and ask those to Weston. Weston, as you were talking, I feel like our parents were on the same page on so many levels. Like you, I also went the public school route, and I meant to ended up in Aspen before college as a fluke because a teacher handed me a pamphlet in high school and was like, "You should go there." And I was like, "Where?"
Cool.
So I mean, yeah, I was like, "Okay, I'll go to Colorado." And I mean, and then people said to me, "Oh, you should go to Tanglewood." And I'm like, "What's Tanglewood?" I mean, so I appreciate so much of what you're talking about. And I wish my daughter, who just actually took the dog for a walk, was listening about practicing because getting her to focus and practice is just insane. Of course, she's 9, so
Yeah.
it's okay.
I
But
started when I was 10, so there's time.
right, exactly. I'm amazing. Oh, someone is asking if you will play for them. um, that might not be able to happen. The sound on Zoom with instruments is just interesting. Have you been, actually, one question for me, have you been doing private lessons? And if people are interested after watching this, would you accept, do you have time for that, or is that just too much?
I have done some lessons and some master classes via Zoom,
Mhm.
and I've enjoyed them quite a bit. So my time is so limited right now. I mean, I wouldn't tell people like, there's no way I can ever teach a lesson, but
Mhm.
maybe not in the next month, you know?
Okay. Okay.
If you want to take a lesson, you go to my website. You can find like the contact information there. Send me an email. We can probably at some point in time figure something out.
Right. It's so interesting. I mean, at least for the New York Youth Symphony in this online system that we're working out for this fall, it's like, wow, we can have masterclass with, someone from the London Symphony or whatever. I mean, it's kind of this unique lemonade situation, if you will. So I think that that's great. We do have a question from our music director of the orchestra, Mike Repper.
Oh, hey,
Um,
what's up, Mike?
I don't know if you can see it, but it says, curious if you have a moment you can point to as a specific learning experience where you might have realized you were definitely doing something that was leading you off track as a student, and how did you learn to correct?
Wow. That's a really good question. You know what's interesting, Mike, is I realize things that are off track all the time, even now. Just talking from a technical perspective on the instrument, that's why I was saying earlier why I love practicing so much because it's kind of this endless exploration of things you can always figure out and find ways to do things better or more efficiently. And I think about the way that I play the instrument now, which my technique is completely different than it was back when I won the audition for the orchestra. In fact, if I think to myself about the technique that I used to accomplish my musical goals at that time, I have no idea how I was able to be successful. I was like, how did I play with such a faulty concept of technique and still manage to win auditions? It's crazy. I mean, I look back and I think it was the dumbest thing. And now my understanding of technique is so much more clear, and I do things so much more efficiently and effectively and accurately and with much less effort than I ever did before that it's almost shocking to me how that it was even possible to have any success before. And some of that is related to the way that I conceptualize phrasing, the way I conceptualize vibrato, the way I think about my embouchure. I mean, there were things even my third and fourth year of the orchestra, being in the orchestra, where I completely rebuilt my embouchure or reshaped it. I mean, I can even look at videos of myself playing from 10 years ago versus videos of myself playing 6 months ago. I'm like, that's a different setup. It's not only a different trombone, a different mouthpiece, but like physically what I'm doing is a totally different thing. And I know that I've learned something and that I've really turned a corner because um, I can't go back and do it the old way successfully at all. So I remember changing my embouchure. I used to have a thing where I'd roll my bottom lip a little bit under my top lip, which I don't think is the most successful way to play a brass instrument. I managed to work around it. But I remember even as a 25 or 26-year-old who had a big professional career, sitting in front of the mirror for hours every day, working this thing out and getting it really organized and correct. And my understanding, every couple of years, my technique evolves and changes. The only reason I mentioned that is because he said, was it leading you off track as a student? It was leading you off track as a professional. So, if you're really thinking about it, it's like there's always something there. And someone I think about is Tiger Woods. I remember when I was in high school, I think it was when I was in high school when Tiger Woods won the Masters by 12 strokes.
Mhm.
And at the interview, people got really annoyed with him and thought that he was super arrogant because they asked him how he played that day, and he said he'd give himself a C.
Mm.
They're like, you just won the Masters by 12 strokes and you're not happy. And he said, yeah, in fact, I'm going to go back and I'm going to rebuild my swing. And they're thinking, why would anybody who just won the world's most difficult golf tournament by a landslide decide they want to go reinvent their swing? And it's because it's going to make it better. So, so it's always happening. Sorry, it's a long answer to the question, but it's the honest one.
It's very interesting. It's very
No,
interesting.
that's great. And
I
I
think there's evolution. I'm sorry.
no,
I
go
think
ahead.
there's
Sorry.
evolution. Your talent one's talent when one is young is one thing. And as we evolve, what would be really sad is to say that 21-year-old. It's a natural progression the more we learn. But I suspect that everybody heard all your talent. Well, obviously they did. We can't always judge what we were doing then. What's really interesting is that people, no matter how talented they are, they're still going back to take responsibility for it. If this is what you do, then get it better and better and hone it and get right into the details and make sure it's good. But it is interesting. Our older selves are not anything like our younger selves. Thank goodness.
That's for sure.
Well, I think that was the only other question, unless you feel like playing on the trombone. I think that this has been a wonderful hour. The two of you have been incredible to watch and to listen to. So many lessons for everyone of all backgrounds and ages, and
I feel like
Thank you so much. It really has been a pleasure. It really has been.
sorry, for a second, I lost your sound. I couldn't hear what you were saying, but
We were paying homage. We were telling you how wonderful.
yes, thank you.
one second. Let's see. I'm gonna turn my mic way down so the volume's not too high.
Oh, he's going to do it.
Oh, okay.
Is the sound distorting or is it okay?
No, it's good. It's good. It's really good.
All right,
Good.
let's see. Just a few bars. I will. Just a few bars of I'm not a jazz player, obviously, but
I almost,
that was J.J. Johnson's Tangents. He's one of my favorite jazz musicians and one of the favorite tunes of his. So there you go. For
beautiful.
whoever asked me
Thank
to play.
you.
For
They
sure.
say
so
it's
much.
awesome. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonna. Thank you. Bye, Weston.
Thank you,
Have a good one.
Weston. Bye. Thank
Bye.
you, everyone, for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.